When a seasoned African president mocked a young revolutionary on the world stage, he thought it would end with laughter. He never imagined the entire continent would rise in silence, waiting for a voice that would shake the walls of power. What followed wasn't just a response, it was a thunderclap that echoed through generations. The mockery that echoed. The air inside the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa felt heavy with expectation, a gathering storm of ambition, history, and unspoken rivalries. The Pan-African Leadership Summit, an annual meeting of the continent's most influential heads of state, was underway. Flags from over 50 nations lined the vast walls of the conference hall, their colors swaying gently in the cool draft of the high-ceilinged room. Cameras blinked like watchful eyes, and reporters buzzed on the sidelines, alert and hungry for drama. It was a place where power converged, where alliances were forged, and sometimes broken. The room brimmed with leaders bearing the weight of entire nations on their shoulders, yet among them, two figures stood out in stark contrast. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria and Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. President Tinubu, dressed in a regal blue agbada embroidered with golden threads, exuded the aura of a seasoned politician. He was Nigeria's elder statesman, a man whose influence stretched over decades, known both for his cunning maneuvering and his sharp political tongue. In contrast, Captain Ibrahim Traoré wore his military uniform like armor, modest, unadorned, utilitarian. At only 36 years old, he had become a symbol of a new Africa, one unafraid to reject Western dominance, one that prioritized sovereignty over diplomacy, grit over glamour. The contrast was as symbolic as it was personal, and everyone in the room knew it. The summit had begun in traditional fashion, discussions on regional integration, economic cooperation, and the enduring challenges of security and infrastructure. Yet, beneath the surface of scripted speeches and polite applause, tension simmered. Western interference in African politics had become a divisive topic. While some leaders favored diplomatic engagement, others, like Traoré, had openly resisted neo-colonial influences, often at great political risk. It was only a matter of time before this ideological divide burst into full view. When President Tinubu's name was announced, a ripple of anticipation surged through the room. He strode confidently to the podium, flanked by aides and followed by a subtle, rehearsed wave to the audience. His voice, rich and commanding, filled the hall as he launched into a speech championing African unity, the need for infrastructural development, and economic partnerships. For the first 10 minutes, it was what everyone expected, a call for cohesion wrapped in diplomatic prose. But then, Tinubu's tone shifted. "We live in a time where noise can often be mistaken for leadership," he said, pausing to let the words sink in. "While some among us play soldier and shout about sovereignty, we, the seasoned statesmen, understand that diplomacy, not youthful defiance, builds nations." There it was, a single line, sharp as a knife, thrown like a gauntlet. The hall fell silent. The jab was unmistakable. All eyes turned instinctively to Captain Traoré, whose expression did not waver. He remained still, unmoved, though the air around him seemed to quiver with tension. Tinubu continued, oblivious or indifferent to the unease his words had caused. "It is not enough to wave flags and chase foreign soldiers out of your lands. True leadership requires vision, stability, and the wisdom to engage rather than provoke," he added, now fully leaning into his rhetoric. Behind him, some members of the Nigerian delegation chuckled while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even those sympathetic to Tinubu felt the sting of condescension. Cameras captured every second. Within minutes, clips of the speech began circulating online. Social media exploded. Nigerian pundits praised Tinubu's swagger and seasoned composure, hailing him as a voice of reason. But elsewhere, especially in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea, The response was very different. Commentators lambasted the remarks as patronizing, emblematic of an out-of-touch elite who had long kowtowed to foreign interests. The insult wasn't just to Traoré, it was to an entire generation of Africans who saw in him a chance to break the chains of dependency. In the VIP lounge after the session, whispers filled the room. Aides from multiple delegations questioned the wisdom of Tinubu's comments. "He may have overplayed his hand," muttered one South African diplomat. "That young man, Traoré, he has the hearts of many right now." Meanwhile, the Burkina Faso delegation sat silently. No rebuttal, no press statement, just a heavy, knowing stillness. But behind closed doors, the temperature was far from calm. Traoré, though outwardly composed, paced in the privacy of his suite. He was a soldier, but also a strategist. He knew that a response made in haste could cost him. But silence? That too sent a message. By nightfall, a new narrative was taking shape. Clips of Tinubu's mockery juxtaposed with images of Traoré visiting soldiers in remote villages or standing defiantly before crowds in Ouagadougou went viral. Hashtags like Traore Truth and Respect Africa began trending. Artists posted drawings of Traoré clad in armor, protecting Africa's dignity. Even leaders who had once distanced themselves from the Burkina Faso captain now began to reconsider. Inside, a modest war room, Traoré met with his closest advisors. "Let them laugh," he said quietly, his tone measured. "But when I speak, I will not speak for Burkina Faso alone. I will speak for every African tired of being mocked for dreaming of freedom." The room nodded in silent agreement. They knew what was coming. The next day, the summit would reconvene, and the world would be watching, not just for more speeches, but for a reckoning, a response, a roar. Tinubu may have intended to flex his seniority and political mastery, but he had inadvertently lit a fire. And in that moment, whether he realized it or not, the mockery he cast had become the spark of something much larger. The echoes of that jab did not fade into the silence. They bounced, multiplied, and became something else entirely, a call. And Captain Ibrahim Traoré was preparing his answer. The morning after Tinubu's biting mockery of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the Pan-African Leadership Summit in Addis Ababa simmered with tension and anticipation. The halls buzzed, not with diplomacy or celebration, but with speculation. Every corridor whispered the same question. How would Traoré respond? The previous night's footage had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. Tinubu's jab, delivered with the cool arrogance of a seasoned politician, had sparked not only controversy but a digital uprising. Across the continent, young Africans posted messages of solidarity with Traoré. Memes of diplomatic dinosaurs and youthful lions flooded Instagram and Twitter. Commentators were divided. Some praised Tinubu's experience and eloquence, while others condemned the dismissiveness, calling it a relic of the very neo-colonial mindset Traoré had built his movement against. In the Burkina Faso delegation's hotel wing, silence reigned. Traoré, normally reserved but warm with his inner circle, had barely spoken since returning to his room. He had stood at the window for hours, arms crossed, watching the Addis skyline as the city blinked with light and expectation. His advisors had offered to help draft a formal response to soften his stance or redirect the narrative, but he refused. He knew this moment was larger than pride. This was about the very soul of African leadership and who would shape its next chapter. As dawn broke, Traoré rose, dressed in his customary military uniform. No gold embellishments, no ceremonial fanfare. Just the brown fatigues of a soldier and the firm walk of a man with purpose. When he entered the grand hall that morning, the air shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Some ministers stood instinctively, not out of protocol but respect. The young president from Burkina Faso, the man mocked just the day before, now walked not as a victim, but a storm about to break. Cameras from Al Jazeera, France 24, and Pan-African news outlets zoomed in, broadcasting live across continents. He took the stage without notes, teleprompters, or speechwriters, just a bottle of water and the weight of a continent's hope resting silently on his shoulders. He stood still for a moment, allowing the silence to thicken. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a quiet gravity that drew every ear closer. "Yesterday," he began, "a statement was made that dismissed the voices of youth as noise, our struggle as theater, and our sacrifices as inexperience. I did not respond then, not out of fear, but respect for the room and for the millions watching who deserve better than reactive politics." His eyes scanned the audience, catching Tinubu's gaze for the briefest moment before continuing. "But today I speak, not as a head of state, not as a captain in uniform, but as a son of Africa, born in the dust of Sankara's betrayal, raised in the echoes of coups and colonizers, and committed to breaking that cycle." The hall remained frozen in breathless attention. We, the youth of Africa, are not children playing with rifles. We are not loudspeakers shouting into a void. We are survivors of economic warfare, refugees of decisions made in air-conditioned rooms thousands of miles away. We are not dreaming of power. We are waking from the nightmare of dependency. His voice rose now, trembling with controlled fury. We are not soldiers of chaos. We are soldiers of clarity. Because when our people starve, when our villages are raided by terrorists funded by foreign interests, when our water is poisoned by mining companies protected by international law, who do you think they cry to? The IMF? The World Bank? No, they cry to us, and we answer. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Even previously stoic diplomats nodded slowly. In the front row, a delegate from Mali wiped his eyes. The truth in Traoré's words pierced. Deeper than policy, it struck the collective African memory of exploitation, betrayal, and forgotten promises. Yesterday, my colleague said, "Diplomacy builds nations." That is true. But diplomacy built on fear, on colonial compromise, on handshakes soaked in foreign oil does not build. It binds. It shackles. We, the new generation, refuse those chains. At this point, applause interrupted him, not orchestrated, but raw, spontaneous. Traoré paused, letting it wash over him, before raising his hand to continue. Africa cannot rise by imitation. We cannot copy the West and expect freedom. We must walk our own path. Even if that path is muddy, even if it is mined with resistance. Because freedom, real freedom, is not given. It is taken. It is earned. He turned to the audience more fully now, voice booming with conviction. Our nations are tired of being laboratories for failed experiments, tired of aid with strings, tired of leaders who fly first class to beg for second-hand respect. My Burkina Faso may be small. We may be struggling. But we are free, and that terrifies those who prefer a quiet Africa, an obedient Africa. Gasps followed. Traoré had crossed a line others feared to approach, but he walked it boldly. When you mock our uniforms, you mock the thousands who died defending our sovereignty. When you call our movements noise, you silence the voices of millions who have never been heard. And when you dismiss the youth, you dismiss the very future you claim to build. Now the applause was thunderous. Even delegates from countries, long considered pro-Western, clapped with force, standing one by one like dominoes falling to a new rhythm. In the back of the room, a CNN correspondent whispered to their producer, "This is history unfolding. Get the feed to New York, now." Traoré stepped forward for his final words. "Let this be known. Africa is not waiting anymore. We are not asking. We are acting. And those who lead must lead with dignity, not derision. With courage, not condescension. The old ways are dying. A new dawn is here. And it speaks not in whispers of approval from Paris or Washington, but in the thunder of a continent reclaiming its voice. With that, he stepped back from the podium. The room exploded into applause, cheers, and tears. Some delegates hugged. Others shouted slogans. One even raised a clenched fist in salute. Tinubu remained seated, stone-faced. But cameras caught it. A subtle shift in his jaw, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He had underestimated the power of narrative, of fire, wrapped in humility. He had played to the old room, but Traore had spoken to the new Africa. Outside the summit hall, thousands had gathered, youths waving Burkinabe flags, activists singing freedom songs, farmers, students, musicians, all watching Traore's speech on giant screens. And when he exited the building, flanked by his security team, the crowd erupted. Traoré, Traoré, l'Afrique se lève. Phones lit up. Hashtags trended globally. Traore thunder. Africa rises. Tinubu mockery backfires. The world was no longer just watching Africa. It was listening. That night, political analysts across the globe scrambled to recalibrate. The balance of African leadership has shifted, one BBC analyst admitted. This is not just generational, it is ideological. In the streets of Ouagadougou, spontaneous celebrations broke out. Not because Traore had humiliated Tinubu, but because for the first time in a long time, they felt seen. "He speaks for us," a young woman told a reporter. "He speaks the truth." Back in Nigeria, public reaction was mixed. Many admired Tinubu, but others felt let down. Some questioned why a leader of Nigeria's stature had stooped to insult. One popular Nigerian influencer tweeted, "We should lift each other up, not mock each other's battles. Traore may be young, but he's right. Africa must change." And so, as night fell over the summit, one truth became clear. This moment, this clash, was more than a headline. It was a torch passed from old guards to new rebels, from polished speeches to raw truth, from compromise to conviction. Tinubu may have tried to define Traore with mockery, but Traore redefined leadership with courage. And in doing so, he didn't just win an argument, he ignited a movement.